Welcome, everybody. It's going to be an interesting session, and I hope that you're keen to get some notes, but you're also keen to contribute as I go through this particular forum and we address the topic of lateral reading and online information. Just so we're all on the same page, anything that we share in these particular forums are from the position of the individuals who are presenting. For myself, I'm speaking from what I actually have done with students, but also some research and investigation around the particular topic that we've got for this broadcast. Others will be sharing too, and so it means that if they share, you have to think about how you would use it within your particular environment where you're working. We do have a restriction that we don't give permission for any capture, recording or reproduction unless you have prior permission. But as I said, you will all get access to a recording. What I thought I'd do is kind of set a scene, just doing some exploration as to, in recent times, where young people are going to, the young people that we have in our classrooms, where they're actually going through. Now, in this finding, it's all about news media, but it should give you some indication of where they go if they want to get access to information that keeps them up to date, or they want to know what's happening. It's interesting to see that across the two different age groups, family come into play for their source of the information that they're seeking. For the older teens, it's social media that they're going to. And of course, there are various formats. They might be following certain influencers, and so they're seeing what they have to say. We get situations where in each group, they say the younger group says they talk to a teacher or another adult, and for the teens, it's they'll look at television. So it's interesting to see where people are going to find the information. It gets in a little bit more detail here, where they talk about where they've gone to at least once. Now, interesting is that 88% have consumed information or news from one source at least. And often we find that the students that we work with usually go to one source, and then we have to continually be nudging them or encourage them to go to more than that. But what I find fascinating with these results from this 2020 report is that they're getting information from sources that we may not consider are highly credible sources when it comes to looking at online information that they might use in their academic or scholastic work. If it's current affairs conversation, then certainly, yes, all of these would play a part. But we've got things like websites and newspapers, a low percentage is on that. Family are a big factor. So I went and did a search to find out, well, in the Australian landscape, where do families go to find their information? And again, this is quite fascinating because it tends to mirror where the younger generation are going. Now, you'll get access to these slides as well, so you'll be able to go and check the links and see what information you can find there as well. Now, admittedly, we've got here things that would be seen as possibly more reliable or more credible. There's a low percentage there. TV, of course, we have different perspectives and different viewpoints, to a certain extent driven by the owners of the particular TV station. Then we've got things like online information, online news. Again, if the website is coming from a news source, again, it is kind of reflecting that view or opinion of that particular organisation who funds that news online service. So they're the interesting things that I found. And as you can see, there's not a lot of variation. Social media tended to drop off. But as we can imagine, social media during pandemic became a place that people went to get the most current information that they could find. And then it's starting to slide away. The thing about lateral reading is that it's a different approach to the way that we would probably normally get our students to engage with information. The work that I found from where the original concept came from lateral reading comes from a guy called Michael Caulfield, who is from Stanford University. And his work comes out of a study that they did using different people from different professional backgrounds and also their students. Now, what they did, they got a group of these people together and they asked them to look at two different websites, and the websites were the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatrics. And they asked them to investigate and explore these sites to verify the credibility of these sites. The interesting thing is the students, only 20% verified the correct site. The other site, of which they chose on a 64%, the other site is actually a hate site, and it actually produces information which is counter to the professional group of the American Academy. When it came to the historians, and these historians were people with PhDs who were across a number of different universities, there was a split. So 50% identified the particular site that was credible, that was the source and the originator of information. And then 40% said, well, actually both sites could produce information that could be credible. When it came to people who are professional fact checkers, they adopted the lateral reading skills that they have to actually verify that the American Academy of Pediatrics is the correct site. Now, just to give you, I'll go to this link because it's quite interesting. Hopefully everybody can see that screen. If not, someone can put something into chat or let me know. But this particular site goes into providing more detail about this whole study that was done and the way that they did the actual fact checkers, but also what the historians and the students tended to do. And if you see here, it's probably something that's very similar to the way our students behave. It says that they mostly stayed on the organisation's website and read the about section and looked at things like misspelling banner ads, trying to find the so-called fake news websites. Now, if we think about it, if we go to a website and we go to the about section, these people who publish these sites aren't exactly going to tell us that they're fake or that they're sending you misinformation. They're going to paint a picture that they're quite credible. So we have to use a different technique to be able to find out what the original source is. The fact checkers, they actually opened a new tab and they search for information about each group using Google or Wikipedia. Now, down here a little bit further, when you have a chance to look at this, they actually outline the whole process. And this is what I'm going to go through with you and then see whether other people are using this methodology as well. Probably for most of us, we do encourage students to go to 3 or 5 different sources to be able to verify the information they find. But this concept of lateral reading actually gets people to verify the credibility of either who's publishing it or what the publication is or who the author is. So it's a different approach, but it's quite effective in the way that it's transacted. So let me just get back to the presentation. Hopefully everybody can see that again. For most of us, we probably are very familiar with using the CRAAP test because it's something that's easy. But what the general feeling is now, it's more of a checklist, and students can get bogged down in a checklist and trying to make sure they've got everything checked off without actually really identifying whether the site and the author is who they say they are and whether they're credible. They could probably find information that's going to address the question or the task or the assignment they've got in front of them. But this is probably the part that they need to focus on first and foremost, is the actual source of the information. And if they've got that right, then the rest of the information should be useful to them if they're actually looking at how they're addressing their criteria. So the technique that Michael Caulfield came up with is called SIFT. And this link that you'll get hold of here, this is the actual publication that goes into a lot more detail about the SIFT lateral reading approach. And it goes into not just text-based, it goes into images, media literacy, the whole shebang of what we need to be keeping in mind when it comes to getting our students to adopt this kind of professional fact-checker approach. What Michael calls these is not necessarily steps, he calls them moves. So you do the first move, which is stop, and then you do a number of activities around stop. And then if you've got the credibility of the author in place, then you can do your further research around it. But if not, then you move to the next stage, which is investigate. And so we'll go through some of these, but it'd be interesting if anyone has used this approach, if they want to just key something into chat, particularly if you have established a website where you've got this that's available publicly so that everybody who's here can see what else is out there. Because when I did a whole exploration into SIFT, I found multiple LibGuides that were demonstrating how they're using it. For most of them, they just gave the information. I didn't see a lot of examples being shared. It was really just more that this is a lateral reading technique that they use. Just going back to here, this site actually has a video where it gives a demonstration of how lateral reading is adopted. And I'm going to share a couple of other videos as we go through the process. So the very first move is when you come across, or when your students come across a resource, an online piece of information, it's all about the who. Who is behind the information? Who is the author? Who is the publisher? Who's the publication? Who is the owner of the website on which this information is found? The aspect that Caulfield looks at here is if you get that right, if the student can actually verify that this is a credible, authentic person who is writing this information, or it is being published on a credible site, whether it be scientific journal or even a news site, is thinking about, well, okay, what is it that is going to be useful here? And getting the who right. If they can get the who right, then they can go into the next stage of being able to read in a vertical concept of the information that's there, and they can share it and they can use it. But if they can't really verify who the author is or the credibility of the author, then they move to the next step. So for me, my takeaway here is for students, if they can't verify the reliability of the source, as in the author or publisher or publication, then move on to the next stage where you're looking at diving deeper into verifying that the information is correct. So if we go to step 2, I'm going to share with you here a video that's actually produced by Michael Caulfield, and hopefully I can get out of here and get the video going.
Monday.com makes In the last video, we talked about how fact checkers outperformed some of the smartest people in the world. In this video, I want to show you one of the techniques they use to do that. Let's go back to the original example. Okay, we were looking at these two sites. One of them was a long respected professional organization. One of them was considered by many to be basically a hate site, right? So how did the fact checkers quickly discern that it was a hate site? Now this may sound absurdly simple. They came to this page, the American College of Pediatricians, but they didn't read it. They got off it. They went to another page. They went and did a Google search. They started asking themselves, who are these people publishing this information? Once you put in a search like that, a Wikipedia page comes up that talks about it as a socially conservative advocacy group. Its membership, it says, is estimated at 500. You'll see that they have an annual budget somewhere of around 80,000. This is not a comparable organization to the American Academy of Pediatricians. The point here is, in order to find out the truth about an organization you're looking at, do not look at what the organization says about itself. Look at what the web is telling you about the organization. That's where you're going to find the truth of the matter. I'll show you one trick that you can do that makes this technique super fast. Most fact checkers use Wikipedia as a starting point. It's usually a great first stop for investigating journalistic sources and organizations. Take this example, an article from a publication called The Telegraph. So a lot of times I'll come to a site like this and I'll wonder, is this really a news site? So here's what I can do. I can go up to the location bar and I can chop off everything after that initial domain name. Then I type Wikipedia after it. Don't forget the space. And then I hit return. Now if you do that, it will float the Wikipedia page to the top of your search results. And if you click into that Wikipedia article, you can see The Telegraph turns out to be a well-respected publication. You can do this with organizations, publications, experts. Wikipedia won't always return a high-quality article, but it usually returns a good starting point. If you get to a Wikipedia article and you're not sure you can trust it, just scroll to the bottom. Every fact in Wikipedia should be sourced to another publication. By clicking through to those articles, you can verify the individual facts in the Wikipedia article.
Okay, so let's try and get out of there. All right, go back to our slides. Hopefully that'll come up. Now, I guess with most of us, we probably, in the past, we would have stepped back a little bit from using Wikipedia. But for students to be able to get some background information, Wikipedia is probably quite useful. But then what Michael says is you can go into Google and you can take that and drop it into Google and see what comes up. Often it will be Wikipedia that is at the top, but students are able to then quickly see. So from those two websites, they could see that this one site was only quite young in a sense of being a professional organisation representing a large group. And they were able to then work out, well, what information is there. So the fact checkers would not only just look at that, they'd go and open up other tabs and they might take some of the information and drop that in, or pick up some keywords and drop that in and find out, well, is this really quite credible what these two sites are saying? So that is one technique. So what happens is that once you've gone from there, you're actually looking at doing the lateral, which is opening up the multiple tabs, rather than just staying on the page and reading vertically and then seeing whether that's kind of useful. The fact checkers would open up multiple browser tabs and investigate the source using different other tools to do that. Now, some of them might use even different fact checker sites that are quite useful, but for students, they wouldn't be doing that. They could be using Wikipedia or even just doing Google. The takeaway there is that if you can piece together the different bits of information from across a range of sources, you get a better picture of what you're investigating, rather than just staying on the one page and then even going and saying, well, I'm going to do another search using keywords, and you find another site. You have to sort of go through the same process. Is this other site? It may be sharing similar information, which is previously in the past the approach that I would have got students to do, is looking at finding other sites that share similar information and using that as an approach to lateral reading. These people are saying that the students need to go further, that if they do find another site, they have to kind of verify that the source, the author, the publisher, the website itself is actually a legitimate space for information to be shared. So then again, if things aren't quite shaping up, then it's the move three, which is finding a better or trusted coverage. Now that may mean that students have to actually go outside the source and look at different sources. So that's what I was saying before then, going to another page or another information source and checking again whether that's, so going back to step one, stop, check who it is and whether that person is reliable. So the big thing here is also, if there's general consensus across a number of different sources when you've verified the authority, then that is the information that can be used. But it also means that sometimes you may not agree with the consensus, but it's the information that you're finding there, and it's how it's answering the particular task that's being set by the students. And again, he's saying that if you're questioning even these other areas, that you just have to find a better source. And the way that he suggests you do that is that you go right back to trace right back to the original author. And I'm sure that a lot of you have gone to a site and you've seen Professor XYZ from this particular university has quoted this information about the credibility or the usefulness of NAPLAN in our current contemporary environment. What he's suggesting is that you go and you find where that Professor XYZ of this particular university originally said that. So tracing it right back to the original source to make sure that you're getting the credible information. And so that's what he covers in this area here, and saying if the students don't feel they've got the full story, or they're not quite sure whether what they're reading is really quite factual and correct, then trace it right back to the original source that might be referenced in a particular information source, but then go and find that person, go and actually take that author's name, put it into Google with the title of whatever the article might be, and see where that will take them back to their original context. And that way then they can verify that what they're reading on that secondary source is actually correct in the context of what the original author said. So what he's saying is you go upstream to find the original reporting source. Now, what he's got here is a little video to look at that as well. So let's see if I can get out of here again. So this is what he's saying here for this.
Monday.com makes
So now you know how to investigate sources. But investigate what? It's not always immediately clear. Take this example, an article from a publication called Vulture. It says that some Canadian schools have banned discussion of 13 reasons why. But before we get outraged about this, before we start to have a discussion, let's figure out whether it's true. So we go to do our original trick, our just add Wikipedia trick. We pull up the site name, we're going to throw that into Wikipedia, but we stop. And we stop because we realize Vulture isn't really the source of this reporting. Down here at the end of this first paragraph, we see that it's according to CBC News. The information in this article probably isn't verified by reporters at Vulture. They're just reporting on other reporting that the CBC has already done. So we have to get closer to the original source by clicking the link. And here we find the original story. Now that we're at the source, we still check what the source is. And what you'll see if you plug this into Wikipedia is it's one of Canada's most popular news sites. It's long established, it's well resourced, it's got a good reputation. The point is we go upstream to the source till we get to the point where the people doing the writing are the people verifying the facts. We call this the original reporting source. In this case, that original reporting source is trustworthy. So now we can invest our time in the article and start thinking about the issue.
Okay, that's pretty short and sweet, that one. Let's go back. Get the presentation up. So the idea is to go upstream to find that original source. Now, for most of us, if we're curating resources, it's quite likely that we have kind of verified that this is a reliable source that students could use. So if you're curating and you're putting it available through your library collection, then it may well be that students don't need to go into the depth of finding the original source. But you might want to rethink now what you're putting in for curated resources and making sure that you have got valid information and certified information and correct information in regard to the topics. It still would be useful for students to actually go through the exercise of understanding this, because once they're outside of the formal school environment, they're still accessing information to help them make informed decisions. So it's a skill I think that every student will need, particularly if they start investigating, even for doing work from school, to when they're accessing blogs or general websites or social medias or even organisations, then these need to be kind of verified and checked as well. But when we're dealing with these in the kind of upper area here, we're probably pretty sure that where we're directing them to, that the information is quite valid by the sense that we know that the author or the publisher or the publication or the site that we're directing them to is quite credible. So that was just from my investigation, and I'm really wanting to know if anyone is actually using lateral reading or a different approach to how they would get their students engaging in lateral reading. So if anyone's keen to share, please feel free to unmute and tell us what's happening, even if it might be about your website, your school website and what you're doing. That'd be really great, because that's the whole idea of the forum. We kickstart with some ideas, but then we open it up to see what's happening in your particular environment.
I've got one thing that I could contribute.
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you, Jennifer.
Okay, well, this is just something that I stumbled upon before, quite a couple of years ago, before I understood anything about, it was probably before I started my librarian studies, in fact. But I was teaching in a Catholic school at the time, and we were doing a unit in their RE studies on environmental stewardship. And I wanted these boys I was teaching at the time to tap into the idea of environmental stewardship and the coal seam gas issue. So I went to YouTube, and I did actually at the time find a really good website that used brilliant multimedia techniques in order to demonstrate the process of coal seam gas and drilling. And in the process of doing that, I discovered that there were very different perspectives on coal seam gas exploration and drilling. So one from mining companies, one particular YouTube clip that I found that very blatantly played down the potential risks to the environment and to people of coal seam gas drilling. And then another that exposed, more educational, that exposed the potential risks of it. So it kind of got me thinking, well, showing them both those videos then was an open invitation to explore and interrogate the source and to examine very directly the agendas that each of those two entities had. One, of course, to protect their own profit base, and the other, of course, to educate people about risk. And I thought that, in the context of this and looking back on that experience, I thought that maybe presenting students with something that's really blatant and obvious maybe is a way into getting them to buy into this whole lateral reading process, that, everyone out there on the internet has an agenda, and it's not always honourable. Sometimes it's driven by self-interest, and information can be skewed in a particular direction, and certain editing and emphasis can be given to certain aspects of information that influence the meaning making around the whole thing. So it was just, and I haven't got the links with me, although I have bookmarked them, but just a general Google search on coal seam, YouTube search, on coal seam gas drilling would expose lots of examples of what I've just described. And I'm looking forward next term to actually presenting this as a self-composed lesson or two to my Year 7 students in my library lessons, to get them to understand that looking around the internet and questioning and being skeptical about information is a really important thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, good example. And as you say, one group is more interested in their profit growth, and another is interested in education. And so by using that method that Mike Caulfield has developed, you're going back to the source. So as I said before, you could go to the particular web page of the organisation that has produced the videos, because I'm sure in the description in the YouTube, it would have a link to that. And of course, all they're going to do is to continue to feed the particular bias or prejudice that they have, which isn't going to help the students. That they're going to another source, but it's just feeding them the same information. Whereas if they go and start looking at the authors of the material, it can be a whole different ballgame. And then, as Caulfield indicates, you go to 3 to 5 sources to see whether all of those are verifying what the original source has actually said. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Has anyone else got a particular situation or technique that they're using to engage students in lateral reading?
I do. I can't, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Gemma, yes.
I can't get my video to work quickly, so apologies for that.
That's okay.
My situation is that I'm working with primary school students. I'm in the ACT, and interestingly, I've been to a PL at the University of Canberra that used a lot of the same information that you just gave. And we actually looked at those 2 paediatrician sites. And as a group of educators, knowing that there had to be a loophole somewhere, we didn't do this lateral check. So that was quite interesting then. The other interesting thing was they talked about the positiveness of Wikipedia these days and how there are so many references on there that you can double check everything. And I've found that it's really hard to actually convince my work colleagues who are of the similar generation of, been teaching 15 or 20 years, and they all go, oh, but Wikipedia, we shouldn't use that. We shouldn't use that. So that's been a real education process there. But even with my students, I'm trying to do some lateral research now. We're in PYP school, and so the exhibition process is really big. And I've been going back to those, I'm on, those sites that have been around for a long time called about dehydrated water and the tree octopus and this fabulous place called Dog Island that are actually quite old websites. And I'm going in with them and getting them to say, hey, actually check out who made them. And we've been doing that via Wikipedia. The other thing that I'm right in the process of this at the moment, and actually put this request out last night on a few online chats. Someone suggested Batuta Advocate would be a good way to get some articles to get kids to actually look at it. Because I find with Year 6 students that they actually don't really understand the concept of a newspaper or a media site being owned by somebody else. A lot of them don't even really know what a newspaper is. Certainly don't have the daily newspaper arriving in the morning with getting your news in the morning. So that's a very different shift that we have to make. But getting them to understand a bias in a newspaper, in something that's printed, is really challenging for them. So I've been trying to bring things up, but Batuta Advocate, the content's a bit not quite the right level for Year 6. It's a bit above board. The other cool thing that I've got young adults in my house who I live with here, my own children, and I've got them to produce a Weebly website for me just to make their own and to throw a whole lot of articles up there that they're actually creating through the use of ChatGPT and putting it up there as a fake website and putting their own name down as authors and even some of their friends' names who we think will come up when they do a lateral check to see that they're actually studying nutrition, but here's an article about space or something like that, just at the Year 6 level to try and bring, let them see that anyone can put stuff up there. So, yeah, there you go.
It sounds like you're being extremely busy there, Gemma.
Yeah.
Yeah, with news sites, usually they have a link to the author, and you can click on the author and you can see either information about the author or other articles that they've written. So I think it's getting kids to be a little bit more observant about some of the hyperlinks that are on sites and where it would take them, for them to then understand that if it's going to the original author, what is it about this author that actually that person is an authority to be writing this particular article. But you're right, with newspapers, it's a case of, the newspaper online, they're just allowing people to publish. There's probably certain criteria that they have, but it's news articles, it's news, it's getting the newspapers subscribed to or sold or whatever else. So it's become a tricky landscape now for kids. But yes, the good old hoax and, the drop bear site and all this sort of stuff, they're still quite useful to get kids to understand what misinformation is. But I think we're also at the point where we need to get them to understand they really need to check out, because as you said, anyone can publish on the web, and particular, blogs or anything else. It's all out there. And with a lot of free tools for publishing, it's easy enough to do without it being a great expense to somebody. Yeah, thanks for the share. All right, anyone else who's doing something in this area?
Can I jump in? Hi.
Yeah, hi Elizabeth. Welcome.
Hi. Just a very brief thing, because currently I'm not actually teaching in schools at the moment. I'm a trainer. But I was talking to my father just this morning, and he told me that my sister-in-law has self-published a book through Amazon. Turns out that not only has she self-published, she has given herself a pseudonym, and she has created a AI version of herself, and her blurb is about herself is partially not true. She claims to be living in America. It just is really frightening how easy that's much easier that's going to become. Now, I know self-publishing has always been a thing, and we have always been concerned about people blogging and not really blogging without their real name, and not being able to verify. And I think that this is going to be even harder in the future. So I suppose the reason I'm telling you this is that it sort of shocked me that I knew that it was happening, but not quite to that extent. And how can you verify anybody if that is what some publishers, what some people who are writing books are doing? The only positive in this is that she's self-publishing, and obviously that in itself would put up a red mark that you need to check even further. But there would be absolutely no way to check who she is, because none of it is true. So yeah, we've got our work cut out. Yeah. I think the lateral, I think once you can't find, then you have to move on, I think is the moral of that story. But I thought how interesting that it was that it linked to exactly what we're talking about this morning. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I think for me, if I just go back to the this particular slide, I think for me, if the students still feel uncomfortable and they can't verify, then they need to move on, because otherwise they could go down a rabbit hole of trying to find out. I mean, one way, I guess, taking example of your sister is they could put the author into Google and they could see what else has been published by that person. And if they find that there's nothing, then they have to question whether this person is actually reliable when they've only just published once. Whereas they then need to go, well, okay, let's look at the content we're after and put in our keywords and our filters and whatever else, find another resource and then go through the process again. So I think, as you say, it's interesting times that we're in where it is easy for people to publish. But the thing is, I think if our students can verify the who and feel comfortable that they trust the who, whether it be the publisher, publication, the website or the author, then that's a step in the right direction. So thank you. Anyone else would like to share what's happening in their world in this area of getting kids to evaluate effectively online?
Can I just throw in a maybe what I'd call a rhetorical question? I'm wondering if it's time for schools to start subscribing to reputable news products, reliable news products. I mean, some schools do. I understand that. Like I subscribe, for example, to The Guardian, and I subscribe to the New York Times, and I spend money each month doing that. But I think following the advent of Google, I don't see many students, and I could be, generalizing here based on my own limited experience, but I don't see many students being nudged towards reputable or vetted, if you like, news sites where there's some kind of quality assurance mechanism in place to challenge and mitigate the impact of a more random Google search. And I'm wondering if it's time for schools to jump on board as a way of challenging that kind of misinformation or potentially misinformative landscape that Google sometimes leads us to.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a case of, for some schools, it would be a budget question. But I think if I go back to this particular screen where we've got our information sources that we are curating ourselves, or we are subscribing to various databases if it's affordable, or we might even be linking in with other library collections, like a public library. We might have a relationship with the public library. But if we can kind of do a little bit of vetting to start with as a way to kickstart, but we don't want to spoon feed so much that we're not actually teaching kids how to do this in the context that they need to develop this particular skill. And I see here someone's got, I'm worried about the number of students who get their news from TikTok. Yeah, they follow influencers or they get their information from TikTok. But going right back to the beginning, social media was down the list. It's the family. So not only have we got to be looking at our kids, we've got to somehow get our parents within our school communities aware of what they can do. Because if the kids are going to the family in the early years, family's a high level of input for them. In the teen years, it's the second. I think that's another aspect as well, whether there's programs that can be provided to support parents of students as well. So it's a big ask, but I think there's a whole host of things that we need to be mindful of in this era now where we are seeing AI actually on this exponential, like a massive flood torrent coming towards us, where kids, even though some schools are not allowing them to use it in school, I can be absolutely certain that they're going to be using it at home. And so we're going to see more of that as well. So anyone else got anything that they'd like to share? Anyone feeling absolutely overwhelmed? Okay, Leonie says, I've lost my voice. We require students to use 3, 4 or 5 sources, but I wonder if we are showing them how to find them. Yeah. I think it is a case of, we can say to the students, we want you to find 4 or 5 different sources. So we'd like you to get, a website, a scientific journal or a journal or whatever. But I think it's also a case of we have to get them to understand the need now to be verifying the author of those sources, rather than just giving them a checklist like the CRAAP test and so we want you to go through. Because I don't know about you, but I find some of the students that I've worked with, they actually switch off if there's actually too much to do to get them to go through their resources. They just switch off. And then, of course, they're in this pressure cooker of, I have to have this submitted by a certain date, so I'm just going to throw something together and hope. And, of course, when you come to assessing them, you can see the clear distinction between those who've taken the time to be verifying their information and those who've just cobbled something together for the sake of getting the assignment or the piece of work complete.
I know I've said too much tonight, but just one more comment that I would. Sorry. I truly believe that, in a school setting, a lot of the solutions to these problems are often simple. I mean, I've seen it time and time again where there's a whole lot of dialogue around a problem, but at grassroots level, the solution is often quite simple, just a simple strategy. And I'm thinking, as you're speaking, Karen, that that just getting kids to maybe do an annotated reference list, not a bibliography, but a reference list from about their sources to say, well, why did I feel that this was a reliable source attached to each of their references? I mean, it's hard enough to get them to reference accurately, I get that. But to actually write a couple of sentences saying, I felt confident in using this source because, yeah, and someone's just put up the Newslit project, and they actually delivered a series of presentations just recently, and lateral reading was one of their foci in those presentations. I watched them, and it was and like your presentations, they were very, very informative, very, very good. And Jennifer Lagarde in America is also on the lateral reading bandwagon as well, in her work over creating digital detectives. So, you know, there's lots of people globally who are thinking about this, which is really encouraging. But I think that the solutions at the students' level is just to give them something simple that proves that they're doing this level of critical thinking.
Yeah, I think also too, I agree, Jennifer, and I think in this era where we're getting this AI generated material, that we need to actually see some evidence like that the students have taken the time to check their work, and it becomes part of the submission that they put in. It's not just the final result. And I know on a number of ChatGPT and AI and education channels that I'm on, the narrative is now moving to let's look at changing the way assignments are set, and also the process that students need to be giving us evidence for the process. Now, I know I'm singing to the converted here. It's like singing from the same song sheet. All majority of people on this call would be teacher librarians or school librarians or having worked in school libraries. So we've probably been beating the drum about this for a considerable period of time, but I think now we're starting to see this narrative arising in forums amongst other educators, that they're seeing that there's going to be this need. And so students are needing to provide evidence along the way to actually have their final output. One article I read the other day was one teacher said that they ran the student's final assignment through Turnitin, and it said it was AI generated. They spoke to the student, and the student vowed and declared that it wasn't, and the student ended up submitting their work that they had done along the way. So we're really on slippery slopes here when it comes to what students are submitting and how we're actually trying to get kids to understand that they need to be providing the evidence along the way, which is actually showing that they're learning and developing new understanding, and they're able to demonstrate that through the work that they submit. All right, we've got a few interesting things popping into chat. Now, just be mindful, and I'm sure that you are, I'm probably telling people how to suck lemons here, but down at the bottom of the chat, there's kind of 3 little dots beside the little smiley icon. And if you click on that, you should be able to see Save Chat. I hope that is what people can see. So you will be able to save the chat then, and you can go back. But as I said, I'll get the slides and other bits and pieces to you by email so that you can kind of follow through what's happening. So just to do a bit of a close off, because I'm always keen to be sharing what's coming up. So what is going to come up in the next few months? I'm going to do a session on the real world classroom projects, and a little bit about what I just shared before, the way that we're needing to change the way we're setting tasks for students to do that's going to engage them in research, whereby they're going to have to produce work that is demonstrating their own voice and their understanding, but also being mindful that things like ChatGPT, anything from September 2021 on, it doesn't capture. But I think if they start playing around with Google Bard or Bing Assist, that'll be a different scenario. So this is really going to be looking at, well, what can we do to try and change the way students are submitting their work, but also to how we may be looking at assessing that as well. The other thing, Madison's going to come and do a session on the importance of non-fiction. So that could be interesting. She's been before and presented on things about genreification. So this is going to be looking at genreifying non-fiction, but also how you can get your collection in place, which will be inspirational for students to engage in non-fiction reading. And then in July, June Wall's going to come and speak about the different viewpoints, whether AI and its place in education, when it's a benefit or a baddie, and looking at the fact that this is a disruptor and we won't be able to bury our head in the sand, but maybe how we could look at using this to make our life a little bit easier as educators in the process. So that's where we're at for the next few months, and I hope that you've been able to take away some little gems, either from what I was sharing or what others have been able to contribute as well, either via the chat with various links or folk who've shared and unmuted and spoken to us about what they're doing.